Commandment 6, Part 2, Supporting Verses. Throughout the Bible, we can find all sorts of cross-references that support other verses. The one that we want to determine if there's any direct parallel from the original sixth commandment found over in Exodus. To begin, we want to turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 17, in which it says, "Thou shalt not kill." This here is a literal, identical quote to the original commandment found over in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. Because of this, it serves as the perfect example for a supporting verse. However, this is far from the only verse that talks about this issue of killing. We have other examples like Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. "Whoever sheds man's blood, his blood shall be shed by man, for he made man in the image of God." We can see God's logic and justice in this verse. He is talking about violence to your fellow man. Whenever we look into the original Hebrew word for shed, it talks about a deliberate act. We can see in this case, the action in questioning is shedding another man's blood, hurting them enough to draw at least some blood, and according to other definitions, all the way to completely killing them. However, through the last part of this verse, logic given is important. We are made in the image of God, which is in reference to earlier verses like over in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, in which it says, "And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. He created them male and female." This phrase here is able to explain the sanctity of life, giving root that the very gift of life itself is something that is a divine gift from God. We also have verses like Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, in which it says, "And Jehovah God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Other verses like Psalms chapter 127 verse 3, 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verses 19 through 20, and many others all point to the blessing of life itself. This is why whenever we look back into the verses like found over in Genesis chapter 9 verse 6, we can now appreciate all the beauty behind the creation of people. Why God would state that we are created in his image, tagging in that life itself is something that is so precious. We can now see how important human life is. All this just goes on to show why God is making this point that all human life is something that is important because we are made after him in his image. In Leviticus chapter 24 verse 17, "And he who kills any man shall surely be put to death." This is another verse that is out there that talks about murder and how bad it is. It even goes as far to talk about what the punishment is that those in the Old Testament would have had to receive whenever someone murders someone else. A lot of different societies have strict rules that are in place. Pretty much every single one across the board all agree that murdering other people is something that is bad and is something that we as a society should not be doing. We can see this same idea and philosophies carried through and can also be traced back to the Bible. All of these different groups of people have all somewhat followed this commandment of the Bible and copied it as a building block for many countries' laws and regulations. This just goes to show that what the Bible is teaching us about is something that is believed by most people regardless whether they follow the Bible or not. Which is why whenever we get to the main verse of the study for the month, it doesn't have to be a long drawn out explanation of this commandment. Most people are going to agree with and know of this command stated in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 13, and then also repeated again in Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 17, in which they both say, "Thou shalt not kill."